Well, thank you, Matti, for such a kind words. I foresee that this is the beginning of a tradition. Hopefully, this event will have many other events coming also discussing about the freedom of speech, because it's one of the core issues what we have to have in order to have democracy. But ladies and gentlemen, dear Ukrainian friends, I got the topic "Follow the Money" from Matti. And I think the topic "Follow your values and forget the money" would have suited today's even much better than "Follow the Money." But as a professor of international business, I follow the given theme by Matti, however adding a certain flavor of my own values. Since a life of human being killed or wounded in a senseless war should always matter more than money. We should not forget that since February 2022, more people has either been killed or been wounded in Ukraine due to the unprovoked war than what is the total population of the city of Tampere. Moreover, we should not forget that Russia's war in Ukraine is a symptom rather than a disease, like already was mentioned here. The name of actual disease is empire nostalgia, about which Yegor Gaidar, the first prime minister of Russia, warned in his book Collapse of Empire already in 2006. I had the privilege to meet him 10 to 20 times, but unfortunately he died very young, 53 years old in 2009. In his book, Gaidar illustrated why Russian nostalgia for empire is dangerous and ill-fated. Quote, "Dreams of returning to another era are illusory. Attempts to do so will lead to defeat." End of quote. Gaidar demonstrated why swimming against the tide of history would be a huge mistake. The USSR sowed the seeds of its own economic destruction, and Gaidar warned us that Russia is repeating the mistakes. Gaidar was a true clairvoyant. Russia follows the path Gaidar warned us about. Russia is gradually drifting into economic difficulties, a war economy, and becoming a vassal of China. Here it should not be forgotten that when Putin became president in 2000, China accounted for only 4% of Russia's foreign trade, 4%. Now China's share is already over 40%. Russia, in its own empire nostalgia, has made itself dangerously dependent on China. When looking at the current partnership between China and Russia, one should not forget that China is economically 10 times bigger than Russia, and China will grow in every 3 to 5 years by the size of Russian current GDP. But how to stop the war? I would refer to Russian General Alexander Lebed, who died in a mysterious helicopter crash already in 2002. He was asked the question how to stop the Second Chechen War. General Lebed answered briefly, quote, "Let me recruit a platoon of children of the elite and the war will be over in a day." End of quote. Since Finland cannot influence the decisions of the Russian leadership, in my today's short contribution, I will focus on the changed economic relation between Finland and Russia. Before the real beginning of the war, meaning nearly 10 years ago, Russia accounted for 14% of Finland's foreign trade. Now, Russia's share is less than 1%. In fact, Finland's exports to Estonia are currently 9 times bigger than our exports to Russia, despite the fact that Russia's population is 100 times bigger than Estonia's. Another significant change is that Finland does not import any energy from Russia any longer. Currently, Finland's most significant energy suppliers are Norway and, surprisingly, United States. Russia's share of Finland's foreign trade has only been this small during the Russian Civil War in 1918-1922 and the Second World War, when Finland fought to maintain its freedom. Unfortunately, rapid improvement cannot be expected, because even the end of the war in Ukraine will not automatically normalize the EU's political relations with Russia. It must be remembered that it will take years before more than 100,000 reported war crimes cases in Ukraine have been investigated. More than 100,000. And the Russian leadership has acknowledged its responsibility for causing this war. It is unfortunate that a small number of Finnish firms deliver products subject to sanctions to Russia via some former Soviet republics in Central Asia and some other countries in the Middle East. Finnish businessmen should even be more careful when selling products under the sanctions to companies they do not know earlier. To those Western companies with loose morals, who in their greed for money still support Russia, which practices state terror in Ukraine, I would remind what Karl Marx has said. Marx said, "The last capitalist we hang shall be the one who sold us the rope." When we think about the future flows of money, two things must be kept in mind, as they will fundamentally change the future. The first is the EU's Green Deal, which will increase the share of renewable energy in the EU's energy consumption from the current 20% to 40%, perhaps already within this decade. And this is just beginning of new fossil fuel-free era. This means, among other things, that Russia has played itself out as a trading partner of Western countries, including Finland, and permanently. Because the main part of our imports was previously based on energy imports. Second, the world is dividing into two major camps. The West, formed by the United States and European Union, and the East, led by China. Although it still looks like the partnership between China and Russia is getting closer, I predict that this partnership will begin to fray when China swallows economically Central Asia and begins to increase its influence in the Arctic area and eastern parts of Russia. In this context, we should not forget that the Russian Far East has an area almost twice the size of the European Union, but less than 10 million Russians live there. So it's practically empty. If I elaborate further the idea, follow the money, this should mean nowadays that Finland should look to the West even more actively. Already now, 2/3 of Finland's foreign trade is conducted with the European Union and the United States. In fact, United States is Finland's third largest export partner after Germany and Sweden. Sweden is our largest foreign investor, followed by the United States. The American companies employ in Finland 10 times more than the Chinese companies. Nowadays, I follow with great satisfaction the interest of Finnish companies in the reconstruction of Ukraine, which will be a project lasting years, if not decades. When I think about the reconstruction of Ukraine, it reminds me of the reconstruction of South Korea and the Korean War, which ended 70 years ago. Before this reconstruction, North Korea was industrially more developed than South Korea. Now, North Korea has become an economically underdeveloped, isolated dictatorship. while South Korea has become a highly developed industrial nation. If Ukraine succeeds in its internal reform and integration with the West, the analogy between North Korea and South Korea will be repeated between Russia and Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, I strongly believe that the democratic West should continue to support Ukraine, which does not only fight for its freedom and democracy, but also fights against Russia's empire nostalgia. In other words, Ukraine does not fight only for itself, but for the whole democratic world, including Finland. I would like to state to our Ukrainian guests that what you do in life echoes in eternity. And future generations will read about your heroic actions and sacrifices in future historic books. Although genes do not determine human behavior, and in the end only actions matter, I'm even more proud that my genetic grandfather was Ukrainian. He gave his life in 1943 while fighting in Ukraine against the Nazis. Now you fight against the neo-Nazis of the East. In several countries carrying the symbols of Nazism are heavily criminalized. I do hope the similar criminalization would be carried out to those companies and individuals who help Russia to continue its brutal war in Ukraine and continue to attack systematically civilian targets. Hopefully, the West continues to support Ukraine both economically and with weapons. This would enable Ukraine to destroy Russian empire nostalgia. In my opinion, we do not have an alternative to Ukraine's victory, since Russia's victory in turn might lure China to do the same mistake in Taiwan, which would move the world close to the World War III. Therefore, I simply conclude, follow your values and give the needed money to Ukraine. Slava Ukraini.